Okay, well, thank you so much, Michael. Thank you so much, Les. Before we dive into those things that Les talked about, I want to just cover 3 cornerstones for the conversation today. And the first one is the transit is invaluable to the people who use it. So we know that for some people, it is truly a difference between, or the difference between life and death. People who take the bus to life-saving dialysis 3 times a week, people for whom the bus is really their only method of getting from to the grocery store, to the doctor. So for some people, it's the difference between life and death. For many, many more people, it's really the difference between thriving and surviving, right? So these are people who have a job and can keep it because of the bus. Or these are people who can see their friends or their grandchildren because they ride the bus. One of our staff members met someone at Senior Day in the Park a couple weeks ago, and that person lives in Blaine and was so delighted that she can now take the bus because she said it has been years since she's gone anywhere alone. And, you know, just think about that for a second. Like if every time you wanted to go somewhere, you were not only likely a burden on your friends and your family, but you would always have someone in your life who knows where you're going and when you're going and why you're going, and just how different your life would be if that was the case, right? We also know people for whom the bus made the difference between whether or not they could go to Running Start at Whatcom Community College, and whether or not they could go to Whatcom Community College for Running Start made the difference between whether or not they could go to Western. So life-altering possibilities, right? Life-altering, fortune-changing possibilities, and really the bus makes the difference between surviving and thriving for a lot of people. And so I just want that to go up as a cornerstone, that our service really is invaluable to the people who do use it, and nothing that we talk about today about a change in our value proposition will change that. That is really at our core. So I'm sorry, this is sort of a funny room. Let's see. Take a moment, if you wouldn't mind, and jot down, everyone, the 2 or 3 top reasons why you don't ride the bus, or if you do ride the bus, why you don't ride it. Okay. Ready, got a couple? Okay, so this is the magic part of the presentation. I'm going to tell you without looking the things that are on your list. Some of you said that the bus doesn't come to your house, or it doesn't go where you want to go. Is that right? For anyone?
Disability.
Okay, real good, good. Some of you have said that the bus would take, you could go where you want to go, but it would take 2 or 3 times as long, and therefore you wouldn't be willing to do it. Not really good. That's not great. Others of you could make the trip in a time that was satisfying to you, but it's unusual for you to go directly from point A to point B. Instead, you either do have places you need to go in between, or you need to retain the flexibility to go places in between. Is that right? Okay, that pretty much describes anyone with children, right? There are people who likely don't feel safe or don't feel comfortable, and you don't have to raise your hand if that's the case, but I suspect that is. And then for the board members in the room, there could be a bonus reason, which it might provide too much quality time with your constituents who just when you're trying to go from point A to point B, you may, have more quality time than you would like. So that last reason aside, or I should ask whether there are other things you wrote down that I didn't mention. Yeah.
One for me is that I can go somewhere maybe in the evening, but then I can't get home.
Right. Okay. Yeah. The span of service doesn't do it.
Yeah, the schedule.
Go different places every day.
Yeah.
And so it's not like there's a route I can always get.
Right. Yeah. Right. So even keeping track of how you go every day. And what did you mean by accessibility?
Well, living in Ferndale.
Okay. Yeah.
The schedule is terrible.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. is it's just not feasible or accessible to, you know.
And you actually made me think of another one, which is, I don't know if this is true for anyone else in the room, but certainly we hear it, that there is bus service and I want to take it, but there's something between me and that bus stop. Or there isn't something between me and that bus stop that allows me to access it, right? So there isn't a sidewalk or there is some physical barrier. So those are all important reasons. And the reason I think it's good to think about those is that the exact same things that are on your lists are in the minds of most people in Whatcom. They are valid reasons. They are pervasive reasons. And they are why WTA does provide safe, reliable, friendly service, but we mostly provide it to people with no other alternative. You all have the very same reason why.
If I could, just on this, the importance of this too is what the board has set for us on transformation is to help us get better. And the philosophy that we're trying to take is a get real, get better mindset, that in order to get better, you have to get real with what are the issues and what are the problems, so that then you can define the problem set to then try to develop solutions to solve those problems. So it requires delving deep into what are the problems and how can we get better. So I appreciate the discussion.
Yes.
I think there's an intangible too, which is the fact that many people think too.
That's right, exactly. Just an awareness issue. Yeah.
It's,
Okay, does anyone know what percent of trips in Whatcom County are made by bus? I guess.
Two.
that is,
15, 2 or 4. Anyone else? Well, the best information we have is that it's 3%, but the best information we have is from before COVID. So if anything, that number has gone down, not surprisingly. Transit operators, the closest mark there. And so not only is that number pre-COVID, but it includes anyone who's going to school. So that's everyone who's going to college and university, but it's also every child getting on school bus. And that, the percentage of trips that are made on Whatcom County is what's called mode split. And our mode split is not unusual for a North American community of our size. And it's not even the result of things we're doing poorly or things that we could do better for the most part. It's largely the result of things outside of our control, like almost everywhere you go in Whatcom County has low cost, convenient parking. And there's one exception to that. Anyone know what it is? Yeah, exactly. So Western does not have low cost, convenient parking, and no surprise, WTA does great at Western. It captures a lot of the most at Western. There's also a lack of significant congestion when we have low density land use, which means it's pretty tough to provide service that's attractive in those places. Whatcom County has extremely high car ownership. Does anyone want to guess what percentage of households in Whatcom County are zero car households? 2%? Anyone else?
Yeah, what was the?
What percentage of households in Whatcom County are zero car households? They don't have access to a vehicle. Well, it's actually 7, so it's not quite that, but it's. I was trying to match it up with the writer. Yeah.
That 7%, what percentage are, I'll call them choice by choice, and what percentage I just can't afford a car?
Right. I don't think we do. Yeah, I don't think we do. Right. So in different types of urban areas, the reasons for it would be very different. But the fact remains, there are very few people, including quite low income people, who still have the option to drive. Let's see. Yes.
Just revert from that just for a minute. It'd be interesting to see the age demographic too. I know a lot of elderly people no longer have.
Yeah, that's right. That's going to feed into it too. That's right. Yeah, there's people who also can't drive for other reasons other than income, right? So finally, it's also the case that North American communities make a relatively small investment in public transportation, at least compared to places where transit is meant to provide more everyday mobility. So just for kicks, I took a look at 2 cities in Europe that are similar in size to Seattle and Bellingham, and they're a similar distance apart. So Milan in Italy is about the same distance from Piacenza in Italy as Seattle is to Bellingham, about the same size. And while we have 2 round trip trains per day between our 2 cities, how many do you suspect they have between Milan? 8, anyone else? 10. Anyone else?
13.
Okay, 13, 31 trains per day. And I could have gone to the Netherlands, I could have gone to Denmark, I could have gone to Austria or Germany. I mean, those are your high performing, tons of investment in public transportation countries, but I didn't. Italy is right kind of in the middle of the pack, and yet, you know, clearly they're the way that they support transit is much more in line with a place that expects transit to be a part of people's everyday mobility, right? So the reasons I'm going through all of these is to underscore that our mode split of 3% is typical and it's quite understandable. And our current course and our current operating conditions, it's also not likely to change. So those are our cornerstones.
You say typically referring to the United States.
Yes, yeah. Anything to ask or add at this point?
What does it say at the bottom of it?
Oh, that's the part about on our current course and within the current operating. I don't know what to read it.
That's the eye doctor.
Yeah, I failed.
Okay. So with these of our foundation, let's talk about what's with sharing our shift, you know, in our fundamental value proposition. Does anyone know on average how many people on a system-wide would otherwise drive how many people on the bus would have otherwise driven?
%20.
Yeah. If,
Oh, sorry. So if they weren't on the bus, what would they be doing to accomplish the trip?
Would they bike, would they walk?
Yeah, would they be biking? Would they be walking? Would they not make the trip? Would they make a ride share trip? 12%. Okay. So it's a little better. This one's a little better than you all think. It's 33%. However, that is a measurement that we took before COVID. And I ride the bus every day, dance on the bus pretty much every day. And I would say the shift or the ratio of people who have an alternative to people who don't has shifted, if not significantly. Would you say that's probably true? Yeah. So, but let's just say for today that it's 33%. If it were 33%, that would mean that 2/3 of the people on the bus are not walking, or excuse me, they're not replacing a partner. So this maybe gets at your question. They would have been walking, or they would have been biking, or they would have been sharing a ride, or they wouldn't have gone. And in other words, only 1/3 of the people on the bus present a carbon benefit. Their being on the bus has other benefits, but it doesn't have an environment. Making sense?
Mhm.
Okay. So in order for WTA to be carbon neutral, we would need 2,400 additional riders per day who are replacing a partner who would have otherwise driven. And that's about 3 times as many people as we have now. In all the time I've been at WTA, which is 21 years, we've not achieved that. So currently WTA is adding more greenhouse gases than we're subtracting. Nationwide and locally, transit ridership has been trending down for quite a while. And I think we set some charts in advance. Does anyone remember about when that? Or maybe down there also. Anyone know about when that began?
It's like 2009.
2009, yeah, around 2009, transit ridership did. And then we all know that it plummeted, just fell off the chart, right, in COVID. And as you'll see on the red chart, the second chart, it's, slowly ticking back up, only to the pre-COVID levels, which had been falling for quite a while. Meanwhile, our cost to serve people or costs to operate service have been going up for the same reasons as costs are going up in all of your organizations. So this is also important. Ridership has been trending down for many, many years while costs continue to go up. Any questions or things to add on this so far? At the same time, tremendous investments are being made in public the COVID relief dollars. We have the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which is in part responsible for some big competitive grants we've gotten recently. We have new formula grants that have come out through Move Ahead Washington, and we have also had strong sales tax receipts. Meanwhile, I think it's fair to say that most people are highly conscious of huge, painful challenges that are affecting our community right now. Things like homelessness, like substance abuse, mental health crisis, public safety. And I think those are not only huge problems but they are problems that affect us personally, even if it's just how it makes us feel when we see people in camp or we see people acting out, or we recognize people are experiencing these problems. I think most there are not enough resources. So we continue to be well funded, and there are fewer and fewer people who are personally affected by or feel like they personally benefit from transit. So while we've always enjoyed a great deal of public support, some might ask, what value, WTA, are you providing for this tremendous investment that we're making? I think it would be a fair question. And most importantly, or also importantly, if transit were to lose support, which I think at this point in our evolution is a distinct possibility, if it were to lose support and lose funding, what would be the impact on those people who rely on us the most? If transit support were to shrink and funding were to shrink, it's going to be populations that would suffer. Any questions or thoughts on this?
Several years ago, more than a few years ago, I think the conversation was a little more optimistic. It was about, we've got our core riders, the equity riders, the people who rely upon it because they don't have as many choices or options or resources. And the optimism is, okay, let's focus on growing those choice riders, right? So we just had, that was our problem. Our problem was to go beyond the core and create a new set of riders. It seems like this is a different conversation, like we've kind of almost given up on trying to attract the core riders. Yes, no?
That's good. Oh, go ahead.
I would say no. What this is doing is, this is setting the stage. So it is sounding negative, but it's trying to level set us on why, if we continue on with the same way of doing things day after day after day, the problem sets, it worked. The problem sets now are changing. And if we don't evolve with those different problem sets, we risk becoming irrelevant or just relevant to a small portion of the population. And we don't want that to happen, because we think there are values that can come to the greater population through WTA's efforts. So this discussion is that get real part, and then we'll shift into the get better part and the ways and things that we can do to tackle these things. So I do believe there is optimism, and it's exciting. It's a different way of thinking, and it's a different approach. But as we start moving through the discussion and we start getting a little more concrete on things that we can do, you'll start seeing that if we didn't do those things, we actually aren't having our responsibility and obligation to don't start doing these different things. So thank you for bearing with us on the get real part. It feels a little heavy, and as we've talked about it, it does. But it sets the stage and helps us define the problem set so that we can then bring solutions, tailored, defined solutions to those problem sets that we'll start moving into and talking about as we talk about what we can actually do.
So yes, thank you for identifying the pessimistic portion of the presentation. There will be an optimistic portion as well. Okay, so you as our board and the community, during our long-range planning process, WTA 2040, committed us to driving positive incomes in the environment, efficiency, and equity. Just as a reminder, and also for that Paul just walked in, we add more greenhouse gases than we subtract, which is ridership has been trending down for years while costs have been going up, which is pretty important for our efficiency. And if transit shrinks, our equity populations will suffer the most. So
If I could, just on efficiency, that is efficiency internal, but also external, to go to Ally's point about accessibility and the efficiency, making it efficient for people to use the system. So there's an internal and external component to that.
So while we're in the pessimistic portion of our presentation.
Get real.
Yeah, exactly. If we were to continue on our current course, and if we were to maintain our status quo, what power do we have? What hope do we have to drive positive outcomes in environment, efficiency, and equity? If we continue as we have in the past with our current organization and our current allocation of resources, we are organized almost exclusively around the provision of excellent service. Well, and if we continue with that, while just making improvements, incremental improvements over time, if we maintain the status quo, you know, we're concerned, to get real portion of this conversation, that we don't have much power to drive our positive incomes in these areas. So at this point, I'll pause. Anything to add or anything to ask?
Yeah, let me, if we think about this thing, you know, if you look from the bottom, the transit, the equity is very important as an institution. And the other side is the service is invaluable to people who have no alternative. When you, sorry, I'm a little bit late, I apologize for that. I mean, they have no alternate. And equity, they are very connected, and this is one of the very reasons we exist, right? Efficiency, I think this needs a little deep dive in why our ridership is decreasing. I think it needs a little more. We need to really find out what is happening there. Is the cars becoming cheaper? The cars have become very efficient. If you look at from 80s, 90s, the car per mileage is really dropped. And other thing is our population growing. People are places we may not see that they don't have an alternate, but they are on the cusp of that. They can get an alternate. And they rather get that alternate than not get. You know, that's where the rub comes in, the people who can barely, but they like that alternate because they're living at a space we do not have frequency to meet their needs, so they go for the alternate. So I'm going to come back to the environment part. That's, to me, is a little bit soft. It's very emotional. I know it's very hard to talk about the environment in our community, in any community. People start labeling you one way or the other. But I think that is something we need to put some values on it, or they are not equally valued. If we have to see that, okay, how do you weigh them, right? Being a small agency, environment and Whatcom County, when we try to do everything, something got to give. Right? It's that balloon thing, you know, you pinch it here, you do that here. Yeah, I think that needs to be thought about it, Peter, but that's how I see it. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm looking at the equity. It's very expensive what we do per ride, particularly for paratransit. And I guess I'm looking forward maybe to later discussion, but is the way we do it the only way? And I think if we keep doing what we're doing, which it sounds like we might have to change what we're doing to get better at what we're doing, but if we keep doing what we're doing, I think I'm hearing more and more pushback in the community of empty buses. And I think if we would publish the cost per ride, it would be shocking to most constituents. And they would say, what are you doing?
It would be a fair question.
Yeah. And I know a lot of the drivers, I mean, the cost, what, $10 for a fixed transit, our costs are way up because we switched our mode of transportation from diesel to electric. Very, very costly. And that's disappointing. Number one, we're going backwards for all the cost.
I was going to talk about the growing, I think a lot of it has to do with us training and getting the new generation used to riding buses. I mean, I rode buses growing up. That's how I got around, and it's always stuck with me. And somehow this new generation, I think, wants to have instant gratification, it seems, with everything else they got going on. If I can get there in 10 minutes by car and it takes me 20 minutes by bus, well, I'm going to go by car every time. Whereas I'm like, I'll take the extra 10 minutes because I like to just relax on the bus because it's a nice ride. But showing them that and showing them that it's an efficient way to get there, I think grows that ridership. But I think nationwide, that's been the problem, is that, it takes double the time on a bus and people just don't want to wait anymore because it's so much, it's become a car centric society. But, I feel like at least 20 years ago when I was growing up, it was not as easy to get around, and that's how I got around on the bus.
I think we see that even at a school level. I mean, living out in Everson, I grew up riding the school bus for an hour to get to school every day. And if you go and look at any drop off or pickup line in front of a school anymore, you're waiting half an hour to drop the kids off and pick them up. And for a lot of families, that's quality time in the car with their kids. So, we're seeing some societal changes as well, some value changes that, we're so busy doing everything else. When we have that time in the car, that's when we connect. It might not be over a dinner table anymore. It's when we're in the drop off or pickup line. That's when I catch up with my kids, or I'm taking them to practice or whatever. But I think there's also an equity piece in that, is that the families that can afford for mom or dad to drop off a kid at 7:45 or 9 o'clock, and not having to be on their way into town to work or something like that, are the ones in the drop off and pickup line. Everyone, the other kids, the other families are relying on the school's public bus system. And I think even at a school level, there is a fear for kids, or how safe are my kids on the school buses, with this, pretty much unsupervised, except for the bus driver in the front who's trying to drive and stay on the road. So it's starting from a very young age. I feel safer when my mom takes me to school. So why wouldn't I feel safer driving myself around rather than being on the bus? And I think that's been a huge change over the last 30 plus years, is that we feel safer relying on ourselves instead of the greater, the bigger piece. So
There's also this strange trend in employment going on in the last, I would say more in the last 5 years than before, that in job descriptions, they will say, must have a valid license and own a car, even if there's no driving required for the position. Like, it's part of the interview process. They want to know you have a car and can get somewhere, even if you're on the bus line. you know, and you have that access, it's, yeah, and that, like, that kills the equity piece. It's, and there's no reason for it.
I appreciate all these because that underscores exactly why we're trying to have this conversation is these problem sets have changed. And if we apply the same solutions that we applied 25 years ago to today, we're not going to be successful. And so I appreciate all these discussions because it underscores that point and underscores where some of the things that when the board said think transformationally, think differently, that we're trying to propose to help with these because they will be societal changes that are outside our control. But what can we bring to the table to help?
Oh, and then something.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Go ahead.
So I have a pessimistic thing and an optimistic thing to say. Which one do you want?
I'll let you choose.
Let's go pessimistic. If you've got a transportation problem, you're failing in land use. You're failing in land use, you're gonna have a transportation problem. So
Hey, it's all your people moving to where we live.
Agreed. Underscores why it's a countywide.
yeah, what I'm saying is that a lot of this is gonna be on the transit agency's ability. Unless the transit agency starts to influence land use, like where housing goes, where employment centers go. So that's the depressing part. The optimistic part is you solve the ridership, you solve the other two. Ridership goes up, and those are choice riders, and your greenhouse gas equation flips. If ridership goes up, then the equity populations come along for that ride. So luckily, you don't need 3 different solutions. You only need one solution.
It's kind of following Michael's land comment. We're a weird agency in that we have one big city and this vast rural area. If we had, yeah, and I don't know, if we could find transit agencies that were something equal to just a municipality. I think this would be a very different conversation. I mean, you know, my kids grew up walking to school, taking the bus, riding their bike. We didn't have pickup lines really. My neighbors' kids do that. My list about what's wrong with the bus is that they're too hot and crowded when I'm taking them to the restroom. So I mean, you know, we got that world that the numbers might sort of pencil out depending where we go for some of these things. But then the reality of we're trying to provide services to this far-flung areas. Never quite, you know, how do you make that work together? And I think that's one of the big challenges we have in the agency.
Well, one thing, oh, we never did get to.
Yeah.
Can I respond to that really quick before I?
Please
forget?
go ahead.
Because it's a limitation of mine. As you'll see when we get further, what we would like is just to create more places where kids can walk to school and people can walk to their jobs, and that there are places where the buses are maybe too crowded, too hot. So anyways, we'll get there, fix that one.
Only the winter.
Right behind you, what is the mode split?
What is, oh, mode split is the percent of trips that is made by transit.
Okay.
And one of those.
So, you know, the other thing, we are thinking in the same mode that we exist and how to make it better, right? And listening to Todd, that we can have 2 modes in a different way. It's one big city, we can have a transit for Bellingham. We can have transit, which is different for the rest of the county. We should start thinking in that it doesn't have to be what we have today, 40 people buses or things. I just have to say this, I've been talking about it for the last 10 years. Is that we have to find a different solution where our cost is high. I mean, the majority of cost is the handy bus or that area. I mean, we need to rethink that as well. And we need to rethink that all the service to the rest of the county, why we have to run 40 long bus, 40-passenger bus. We should, world is changing, we should change, we should think in totality. When you say transit train, it doesn't mean that we should have less buses. That's not a solution. We have to be creative about it, how we, like Linden Hawk is a thing, it's a solution for Linden with being a small city, but it's still a big city now. So we found a solution for that. And same thing for Ferndale probably coming up, right, in Bellingham. And then we have the rest of the unincorporated. I think that we should just do it upside down. Okay.
I think, yeah, if you go to your European model, I was in Europe recently. I mean, they have 5-passenger buses and they parse out different size buses. I think we would look more efficient if we sent the paratransit bus to Linden and had it half full once in a while, as opposed to a 40-footer all the time that has 2 people on it. That appearance of efficiency would at least have above better public perception. And then, you know, the hop, it's wonderful. I guess when I envisioned it, I think Satpal and I, when we envisioned it, we were thinking public-private somehow. And in my mind, now that I know how much it costs per ride, I'm going, can we hire, an Uber driver and pay him $150 a day to be on standby, and whatever money he takes in, he gets. And that's the hop service. It would probably be much more efficient, and we could probably get a bunch of people to do that, and we would have better service, more service at a more cost-effective rate rather than what we're doing right now. We have to think outside the box, in my mind, or we're going to be in trouble.
Does the union feel about that? Just kidding.
He won't like.
I know.
I'll just tell you.
I know. I'm just kidding.
Underscoring on things we've heard, more dense land use solves all these problems. And I seem to recall when we were in the midst of the 2040 discussion, there's some reference to maybe it's under advocacy of WTA or education on the part of WTA is supporting municipalities' land use. And then, of course, you get into the politics of that, which further complicates things. What year was it that we did the, I don't know if anyone was here then, on the WTA, it's like 2005. You were.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, we were doing the so the comprehensive plan update at that time.
Yep.
I remember the big debate was around versus what was
Coverage.
Coverage.
He answered that question with frequency, and that was what preceded the fastest increase in ridership in the country.
That's right.
It was a compromise.
Oh, but what
It
would
was
frequency?
frequency, but it was also coverage. We wanted to get that, which was a very important notion. And of course, it was because the board appropriately.
But I think it plays into the density and land use part. The whole reason you can go frequent is because you have places that are dense enough that it makes sense.
But if we wait to get there until after everyone has moved in and, you know, secured those habits of driving themselves, they are much less likely to get on the bus.
WTA needs to incorporate its own city and plan it properly.
Yeah. The board,
Does city come first or WTA come first?
the board did authorize hiring this year a land use person, and the reason was with the comp plans coming, it gives us an opportunity to have a more coordinated approach with the comp plan updates coming. So trying to tackle that land use piece on that and development piece so that WTA is involved sooner. So when you're talking to developers, you're not talking after they've already done all their concurrency and reviews and everything. And then all of a sudden you're asking, oh, hey, what about taking more land for a pullout or something of that nature? So trying to increase that coordination, synchronization.
Okay, so these are three reasons or three things that are driving a change in WTA's value proposition. And there's one more. Hearing from you and hearing from our community, there was lots of support for transformational projects and thinking about doing things differently. In addition to hearing from you locally, or from our community locally and from our board, we've also been hearing this loud and clear from state policymakers and federal policymakers. We've been hearing that we need to think differently. We need to innovate rather than bringing the same solutions to these new problems. We need to show value for the major investments that are now being made in public transportation. And we need to think big and think broadly and think differently about how to improve the transportation as an ecosystem. So all these things that we're talking about in terms of land use and those things that support non-single occupant vehicle transportation, right? In fact, Josh and Les and I just got back from the Washington State Transit Conference, and this was, I would say, a dominant theme. Do either of you have anything you want to add about things we heard just in the last couple of days?
Go to first, no.
The legislature was very interested. Missing piece was being able to get from I'm not sure I could understand, but either they were explaining about how to get from your door to door side. And so WatchDOT identified the lack of sidewalk data statewide as a barrier to answer that question to the legislature. So in the last legislative session, allocated money to the University of Washington to kind of develop a complete streets inventory of all the sidewalks across the state.
So in that problem set, to your credit, you set up the Transit Access Fund last year to do a pilot program to try to get after that very thing, which happened in, or is happening in the city of Tech. But that highlights the defining what the problem set is. So, and then tailoring solutions to go after that that problem. So with that, like the complete streets aspect of it, that's that transportation, enhanced transportation ecosystem. How do trips are rarely, you walk out your front door, walk right on the bus and go. It involves walking or biking or some other kinds of things. So how do you have a synchronized, coordinated transportation system? So maybe rented e-bikes, it can be, a variety of things to pull together to reduce that friction to use, so that it makes it easier for people to be able to do that. And that's what we're looking at. And that's what you'll see in these projects and initiatives, getting after that is trying to create that or help create that ecosystem to reduce that friction to use.
I don't want to continue this digression too far, but that's interesting insight that it's sidewalks where data is lacking. City of Bellingham, I'm pretty sure, has GIS layers for every single sidewalk segment and every single crosswalk. Or at least that's the goal, and it's probably nearly complete. Does Linden or Ferndale have GIS of all your sidewalks and crosswalks? Because we can basically look and know where the gaps are now.
We have,
That is not something that I've really looked at.
due to policy 40, 50 years ago in Linden, virtually every street has double sidewalks in the last 50 years. So there's only a few streets that predate that don't have sidewalks in Linden.
Yeah.
And when we pick up stuff from the county, they give it to us when we got to improve it.
I'd imagine we might after next year, just because we're doing a big ADA study next year.
Right.
That'll be a big phenomenon.
I was gonna just share that last month I attended this Washington State Transportation Commission meeting at Friday Harbor. And I brought up this Uber app that why doesn't state transportation spends the money, creates an app, the overall shell, and give it to each city, each county to adapt it to their mapping and their everything. And they were very intrigued. All the commission members were. And they said, we will take under advisement and propose. I mean, it takes time for things like that to work, but they are very intrigued by that. The other thing is sidewalks. we're talking game city. The problem with WTA is not Bellingham. And sidewalk doesn't make you learn to take a bus or not. If you want to walk, you walk. I mean, it's additional, but sidewalk doesn't impact WTA.
Oh, I think it does.
It does.
It does.
That's all the time.
If it's not safe to walk to the bus
Yeah.
stop.
But it does not relieve the transit issue because you can't walk more than 3 miles for everything. It is neighborhood walk or bike, right? But the transit issue is these are taking you longer distance, which is not possible to walk.
So that's a great example of defining the problem. So the problem set's different in different locations. So in Nooksack, the problem was, hey, there was missing sidewalks, so people wouldn't access the transit stop because they had to walk over gravel. And if you have a walker, you can't walk over gravel to get to the transit stop. But it also was the access to the park and to the school and to WTA and those things. And that's where this defining the problem set and then coming together as a whole of society approach to things is, okay, now you don't have two of your jurisdictions cracking into the ground if we go out, because that was on our work plan to fix that or enhance that stop. Now you don't have two jurisdictions going out and cracking into the ground. They're doing it all at one time, saving mobilization costs, saving those environmental costs, all those kinds of things at the same time. And so that's what we're trying to do is define the problem set. And it's not a panacea, one problem equals everything. It's trying to define what those problem sets are to solve the problem. So whether it's food insecurity and trying to do the food farmers to food worker thing, it's looking at the housing shortage, which helps economic development, which helps. So looking at all those and then trying to define those problem sets and then what can we do to help on those various problem sets to be successful and enable not just us, but we're trying to enable the community to be successful, because then we think we will be successful for these reasons to tackle these issues, and these will become the outcomes.
On the sidewalk thing, I can remember Joe Rutan, our former county engineer, was like, we need a sidewalk there. It's like, well, you see a sidewalk, I see a sidewalk with a curb and a curb with a gutter and a gutter with a stormwater system, and all those costs go together to put the sidewalk in.
Yeah.
It's expensive.
So I can't help mentioning though, that I walked a half a mile from my house to the bus stop through the lettered streets. And it will be one of my favorite parts of my day. And I walked about not even half that far from across from Les Schwab, well, not quite, but mid-block on that block. And there are no sidewalks and it's gravel. And the size of the trucks and the speed of the trucks makes it so I wouldn't recommend it for most people of most abilities, or depending on the shoes that they're wearing, it just would be non-doable. So sidewalks, I do get your point, and they do get bigger. So let's see. The reason I wanted to talk about that, about what we're hearing from our policymakers, is that in addition to these factors driving change, it is also the case that if we were to maintain our status quo at this point, I would say we would be out of step with our local, state, and federal policymakers. Local, state, and federal priorities. Any?
Yeah, I'll just hop in because I didn't answer your original question. I apologize.
Thank you.
After talking to the FTA folks, the WSDOT leadership folks, these kinds of things, what we'll talk about is exactly what they're pushing for. And that's what when you see the infrastructure law, the bipartisan infrastructure law, move ahead Washington, those things, that's what they're trying to push us for or push us forward to. And so for us, it's how do we align with our local, our state, and our federal partners to make sure that we are spending those dollars in a way that brings the biggest return on investments for that, and align ourselves with them, so we're not out of step with the expectation. As Ali has said repeatedly to me, we're kind of an accessibility. And to that point, when we talked this week to FTA and to WSDOT, they latched on to that comment about, yeah, that's kind of what it is how do we become more accessible? And that's where many of these problems come in, is how do you when you look at housing, when you look at food insecurity, you look at these problems, It's the transportation piece, the accessibility to those things.
And I would actually challenge the thing that says if transit shrinks, equity populations suffer. I think if transit stays the same, they're gonna suffer.
I had also meant to give you an opportunity, Michael, because you were good enough to join us at the after legislative conference, federal level.
It was a while ago.
It was a while ago, so I won't put you on the spot, but would you at least say that you heard a lot of support for thinking big, thinking broadly, bringing solutions to new problems?
I don't remember. Yeah, it was surprising despite the diversity of transit agencies, different size communities, different makeups of the communities, they were groping all were groping in a similar direction. I think.
Okay, so given all of these, what should we do now, or what are we proposing? We believe that the opportunity before us is to respond in 3 ways, and the first one is simple-ish, and it's the only simple one, and that is to share stories about why WTA matters. So make sure that people know why it's not only invaluable to people who use it, but why it's important to all of us, why it makes a difference to all of us that the bus is working for people. Second,
And that, if I could, that goes to the value proposition, so that people understand when they ask the question, what do I get for my 0.6 of a sales tax dollar? What am I getting in return for that? An investment in us, and that helps see, okay, this is what I'm getting.
so this one is about sharing with them how we are doing value proposition. Make sure this isn't going under the radar, how invaluable the bus is. Other ones are more about shifting our value proposition from providing excellent service to providing excellent service, having no degradation in that, but also by moving towards initiatives that both help to solve community problems and build the foundation for greater transit ridership. Okay, so I'll say it again, my way. So our shift in value proposition is to continue providing safe, reliable, friendly service, but also to embark on initiatives that help solve problems we all agree are problems in a way that could enrich the environment for walking, bicycling, and transit, and potentially increase transit ridership. And then finally, and these two are really quite related, is to just demonstrate the return on investment for, you know, all the recent investments in transit.
Guess I get nervous about the help community problems while improving transit. Is that really our mission? I mean, is that really what we're supposed to be doing as a transit agency? There are problems, but we're in the transportation business. I don't want to take on more than we're supposed to take on as a transportation company.
Well, one of the ways I like to look at this one is that we're not going to go out looking for problems that we could solve that are outside of transportation, but we might take a really honest look at the assets we have and the gifts we have to bear and see if they could be used better. So the best example really is Linden Station, and thinking about, instead of a park and ride, which is an enormous asset, right? It's land that is not being used to its greatest potential. And we know from the conversations we've had out there that there is an existing need, and in fact a lot of people working towards the problem of how to house workforce population. So it's true, we wouldn't just go out looking in a community to say what's going on in Linden, a problem we could solve, but we will look at an asset we hold in Linden and think, could we bring this asset, these gifts, to bear on an existing need in a way that would also build a foundation for transit ridership. So I think that's a really good point, and it's also really important. We're not going to go out looking for problems to solve, but we do have some opportunities in front of us. And if we look through this lens, we will view those opportunities differently than if all we're thinking about is, could we, incrementally improve our service to somehow, help.
That's just a prime example of delving down into the projects, the initiatives and how it implements these whys is, okay, seeing that there's a problem, what can we bring to this to help? We're not going to get into the housing business, but if we 5 years from now or 10 years from now are looking back and going, okay, that's still partially vacant piece of property and underutilized parking right, and housing prices are soaring, and Lyndon's doing a great job economic development wise and creating more need for workforce, that I would feel terrible that we had an asset to try to contribute to solving that problem and we didn't do anything with it. And so we're not proposing we get into the housing business, but rather we have that piece of property. What can we do and how can we leverage that with others to help solve problem and make Lyndon or help Lyndon solve issues when the pet food company comes in and those kinds of things. So,
yeah.
I guess I would kind of directly challenge that. If we stay as a business that tries to convey people around, then we are forever at the mercy of where other people are putting housing and where other people are putting schools and where other people are putting business locations and employment centers, that they're putting things there where they want to for their purposes, and they're creating a problem for us. So instead of like us and them being separate, we've got to move together. Either WTA starts thinking about the where, and or the where locators start thinking about the buses. And you and I both work for city government.
Okay, so what are the ways, or let me see. Yeah, what are the main ways that we can do that? We really would need to, and we'll talk about this in a minute, reshape our organization and the way we allocate resources if we wanted to deliver what we consider sort of our list of transformational initiatives. And to add to this one, something that you said, Todd, about, or actually a couple of you have said about changing our regulatory environment. And I think you as well, Seth, about how we advocate for land use, but you won't see that on this slide, but that's okay. You can't really see anything on the slide. So, provide any. Okay, transit-oriented development.
So these are the strategic project. These are the how we've talked about the issues. These are opportunities that we have to help solve these problems that are within the authorities of transit agencies. And so going back to that, what can we bring to the table to help communities solve problems? And I highlight the word help because we're not going to solve them individually, but what can we do to help? So these are the action things that we can take.
We'll just go through these fairly briefly unless you want to slow it down. So transit-oriented development adds housing, which we desperately need. So that's the part about helping to solve community problems. It also increases the number of places where you could find compact mixed-use development, which makes transit inherently more convenient and therefore more attractive to more people. It also puts services, housing, and jobs together, right? And it puts them near good infrastructure for walking, biking, and transit. So sort of getting back to where you live depends on what looks like a good choice to you, usable choice to you. And in some places, and we've all seen it, in other places, it can even make walking, biking, and transit more attractive, preferable, right? So that's transit-oriented development.
If I could,
Please,
that one deserves, I think, a little longer discussion because it is a win-win-win throughout the community. It allows, gets after the housing part. It gets after that enhanced transportation ecosystem where everything's accessibility aspect of things. But it also, from a purely selfish WTA perspective, it drives up ridership. Every transit-oriented development that you look at across the country, it all drives up ridership. So why FTA and WashDOTs, why there were, I don't know how many sessions at the WISTA conference on transit-oriented development. Why when you're looking, like City of Redmond gave a presentation on what they were doing with it and their mindset flip of how they're going from being a suburb of Seattle to an actual city, and how to make and create space and places that made them a city, not a suburb. And transit-oriented development was one way to accomplish that. And so it helps WTA by increasing, it brings people to transit and transit to people because you live there. This is a personal one for me because my son, that's why he moved into the apartment building he did in Renton, was because he could walk downstairs, hop on a King County Metro bus to take him to work.
The idea that the city, I believe, City of Bellingham waived some parking requirements for some of the new multi-story stuff that's on the GO line. That would be an example.
Yep.
We have evidence here that people are actually, they're moving into those places and they're using transit. And the model was perfect, and they read that kind of national data on that. But is there any, do we track that at all?
Seen enough data yet?
Well, we know rider teams hiring in space. And I would call it maybe not transit oriented, support development. As oriented developments where you actually depend on the transit, so you can reduce the parking. But got to move to that where you have high.
What's transit supported mean?
Basically, it means that transit development to occur, right? But it's not. There is a distinction. But I'd say most of the stuff that we have in all Whatcom County is support development, but I wouldn't say that in those centers, those urban villages, we're seeing more ridership occurring, where you have this higher density.
Every single, I think, Bellingham urban village, I can also name you the major arterial that serves it. And that major arterial is just as car conducive as bus conducive.
But if there's no parking, residences that are built, that maybe kind of prompts more people to have to take the bus or something.
And that's why you need to have higher frequency service, because otherwise it doesn't fall apart.
And also it's another example of you got to coordinate this with the transit agency and land use planning in the cities.
And then there are outcomes of that come to, I think where Todd you're going, is outcomes to the individuals. It's a win for them as well, because if they have good frequent service that gives them accessibility, maybe they don't need a car, or at least a second car, which studies show it's what, about $1,000 a month on average for car ownership, based on what Senator Schunick and others have passed along to us. So it's a real opportunity for the community to win, for individuals to win, for transit to win, and then it shifts more people. So getting after that environment aspect of things. And then I think it also helps the cities as well to better utilize properties and provide the solutions there too. So I think that one is a real opportunity that we have, and do we have the land assets to be able to contribute to that, coordinated with many of the other things that are on there to succeed.
Well, I'm just thinking in terms of Bellingham, for example. Some high level degree of clarity around how we're going to accommodate. Council members, I think we can all agree that fundamentally it's going to be increased density in downtown. See buildings grow downtown, a lot of opportunities, but some of them less of potential partnerships. We're going to see our urban villages expand, a lot of effort into that. And pursuant to House Bill 1110, 7 ADUs and increased units on lots of land in a single family neighborhood. So we have some ability to control that. Fundamentally, we might see some expansion of council member here, but we might see some minor strategic expansion of growth boundaries. But fundamentally, I think in Bellingham, going to densify without expanding growth boundaries. So I think in Bellingham, you're going to find the permanent apartments with ways of transit-oriented development. No, well, I'm inclined to ask you a question about clearly transit-oriented development is going to apply to downtown and in urban villages. You see transit-oriented development also being a part in our neighborhoods where House Bill 1110 and increased density is going to be occurring?
I'm not sure to the level of transit-oriented development. I would think like using the Linden Park and Ride transit-supported development. How do we use our assets to that? What I do think is there's perfect lead-in is to the rapid transit, because you talk about expanding road boundaries being very difficult in many core areas of Bellingham. And if you look at the COGS, Whatcom Council of Governments way to go, it has predictions in 2045, and it's not pretty. So that leads to, if you're putting people, you're going to have to accommodate for people. Road boundaries aren't expanding. How do you move people through, which has a county-wide effect because people trying to get into Bellingham from Ferndale, Linden, Sumas, Nooksack, Everson. It's going to be very difficult to do that. So how do we more efficiently and effectively move people around to get after all the red lines that are in their 2045 projections? So that's where like transit-oriented, many of these work together hand in hand in their coordinated approach. So transit-oriented development, as Tim said, getting the rapid transits to better support that so you can move people around. The city benefits because it doesn't need to expand the road boundaries. We're putting infrastructure into things to enhance that flow of traffic for buses, which then from a individual standpoint, maybe I do want to take a bus as opposed to like what Dan was saying, rather than driving because, oh, I see that bus has a queue jumper or something and it's going quicker than what my car is. So therefore, I'm encouraged to do that.
Yeah, the other, just to answer your question, Seth, is that those, I don't remember exactly how they all ended up, but I know at least there was a lot of discussion about allowing for more in the way of duplexes, quads, all those sorts of things, depending on how frequent the transit was nearby, right? So I think we even qualify with our goal lines for some, but as we talk about rapid transit, do you want more to say about that?
Yeah, I was gonna jump in.
Yeah.
I could read directly to speakerphone. Talk about. Densify over time. To grow the city. Supplying the buses. So that's the part that didn't get done as part of the villages is happening very well, but it's the in between here that's the well. Talk about that one.
Yeah, so I won't talk too much about rapid transit because you're gonna hear more about it from Tim today, but I will just say it serves as a backbone transit-oriented development. To have one is great. To have both is better. So we'll leave it at that until later. Increases by far by the number of people who are drawn to transit, both for the reason you said, Dan, about, well, maybe I could get there, but I couldn't get back. But really primarily just because it is so much more convenient. You really can't walk out to the route without consulting a schedule. Yeah.
So, yeah, hearing Bellingham's plans to densify, that we got Ferndale, Linden, and Everson sitting here going, but that causes our communities to grow faster than we necessarily want. I go back to population data since 1990. Towns have grown 180% and Bellingham has grown 80%. And I think when you build buildings that are tall and house a lot of people in them, there's a segment of the population that still wants that single family residence, and our small cities are taking care of that need. And so we're tragically, maybe, we're pushing the problem out into the county where it's going to cause more traffic and transportation issues. And I guess if Bellingham would grow their urban area a bit more, that would help the single family stuff. And it's probably not in your plan, but the result is we're growing faster than we like.
Well, you sound like a Linden official, not a WTA.
I know, I am.
Right? I mean,
So did that a minute ago. It's not like a,
Well, I know it raises all kinds of.
I know, yeah.
designed to accommodate growing populations, but it also provides local control. And so if Bellingham's trying to do something that we regard as our perspective, smart land use over time, which is a model that theoretically, we could get all of the cities in broad agreement on how we approach growth so that you weren't inclined to continuously over time expand your growth boundaries to the detriment of your sandy loam soils north of the Badger Road that are some of the greatest soils in the entire world, rather than feeding that in concrete for single family development. We had a different growth model. So I think that's one of the challenges for us. Agreements about how we grow.
That's the comp plan update. We're starting very soon.
Yeah.
Which meeting am I in?
Sorry.
I think, you know, the other thing we should keep in mind that what legislature did this year is basically eliminated single family zoning. And its impact will be felt maybe probably in 10 years. And it will be part of our comp plan discussion. And the other part is the next generation, which are coming up, kids who are 5 years old and they are 25 or who are 10 years old, how they think I want a single family home or not. I mean, we should learn from what happened in New York. You know, like we are getting there slowly, but I think that the whole pattern will change as well in next 20 years.
And I think single family will start looking a lot different in the next 20 years and our ideas about it, because I mean, single family can mean 10 different things, right? It doesn't have to mean low density residential. You know, and I think that as far as Ferndale goes, we're trying to move away from that because basically, you know, anybody in multifamily is paying for the road in front of that low density residential, you know. It's the people who can't afford it are paying for the people who can, which is odd system. And, you know, everybody wants to be the last one to move in too.
Yeah. That one.
Plurality of American households are 1 and 2 person, but a plurality of American single family homes is 3 bedroom. Part of our land use problem is right there.
I think that from a WTA perspective, so I'll be selfish for a second, but that highlights, we're kind of caught at the vortex of that discussion. And so I appreciate the opportunity to have the board get us some resources to actually be involved in those comp plans, because what happens, and I think we saw this out with Route 75 in McLean, was there were land use decisions made a bunch of years ago, and there was, transit tried to fix the transportation problem. They weren't coordinated. And so you can put a whole bunch of solutions, transit solutions out there, but they're not really going to solve the problem on that. So I appreciate as the comp plans are coming forward, that opportunity to coordinate, and as we're at that vortex to gather.
Okay, just one last thing to say about rapid transit, or excuse me, rapid transit is that it can bring the best of light rail at a fraction of it. So we'll hear more about that later. Mobility on demand, which is like our Linden Hop, and I would say paired with transit supportive development and walkability, which we have at the Linden site, and transit. That could also help to build that foundation for transit ridership. Again, not going out there for the sake of building housing, but taking land we have and adding housing to the mix could really build support for transit out there, which without any doubt, build more potential ridership than what we have now. Transit demand management, which is a really strange term. Really here we call it smart trips. And this is really the idea that education and encouragement and incentives are a low cost and a fairly effective way to make sure that all of the investments your jurisdictions make in infrastructure for walking, biking, or transit are used to the greatest extent possible. The Transit Access Fund, which bridges the distance between transit, existing transit, and people who would like to use it, but can't because of some obstacle between the service and where they are. So as you know, we've had 2 takers so far, Lummi Nation and City of Nooksack, who are at work on their projects to help bridge a gap at variety. And we're going out soon, yes, for another round of potential transit access fund projects. And then the zero emission fleet transition is on this list. It's not transitional or transformational in the same way as some of these other projects, but is very much transformational in the sense that it will change us in terms of our organization. To support this project, we would need to change in terms of our organization as well as our allocation of resources. And it is most certainly something that demonstrates value even for people who don't ride or plan to ride. So I think it's important.
Yeah, if I could just hop on that, a couple things on that is one, as Maureen said, that will require an enterprise-wide approach to it. It's not just a switch of this bus for that bus. It's obviously the workforce and fleet and aspects of the mechanics going from diesel mechanics to electricians, really. It's planning, what box and routes does that work? It's operations. It's training drivers, because you see the type of driving affects range and affects things that are going on. So it's an enterprise approach, which is one of the reasons it's on there. The other is that these things will all cost financial resources going forward. And all these things need to be balanced as we're moving out and headed forward on what does bring that best return on investment and value. And so it will need to be part of that discussion as we go forward with these other projects.
All right, so it's possible that at this point you're thinking, well, fantastic, go forth and just do that stuff. And just want to mention before my part of this is through the things that we would need, like what's holding us back at this point. And that is, please.
Taking transformational action.
Yes, exactly. So we would need expertise and capacity and capabilities that we don't currently. And so that would be at some point in the future, we would be coming to you for, contracts with consultants or possibly new positions, people we would need to have on board. It will require different sources of funding. So maybe new and different types of grants. And in fact, we have already to for a contract for consultants to help us pursue those just last month. And also different other types of funding, perhaps low interest loans, federal government. So we're going to need to be more exploratory in that way than we have been in the past. And we also need to shift our mindset fundamentally to an agency that continues to do all the good things we're already doing, continues to provide service to people who use it, and to get back to the comments that Paul and Scott were making, we're going to
that was very all that for.
We're going to need to have the freedom to try some new things and to fail at some of those things and to learn from how we failed at some of those things and still have the courage and patience to go back and try new things.
To that end, to both the grants and the financing pieces, there is a rural and tribal transportation grant that we're applying for that would help us with those gaps. To actually, it's a grant to help with operational, to hire some resources to do financing and project management to start pulling together how these things would work. The other thing I'll just say is these things we'll be talking about them next year as the feasibility studies and things start coming together, because they need to be talked about together as for prioritization and resourcing, and they're going to compete, if you will, for all those things. So it's not a wholesale do it, but rather developing a financing plan over a 15-year period. How are we going to structure and do these things over time? To the innovation mindset, it's not a barrier means no. It's a barrier means how we've identified what we need to knock down. How do we do that? And how do we then move these things forward? Because the value proposition of doing these things for the community is so great that we need to figure that out. And so it's a mindset shift for us. But it's a super exciting one. And I think about what it could look like 10 years from now on many of these things and how goodness it brings.
So at this point, I just wanted to open up for.
If I could, to that end, the outcomes we're ultimately looking to drive for these things in no particular order is increasing the accessibility, increasing mobility, filling the gaps in service, encouraging economic development. Where are those places where we can help stimulate, like in Linden with the growth that's out there, economic growth, allowing for greater independence. How do we help people age in place, which has a huge societal benefit on it, whether that's, do you have to grow residential for seniors if you don't have a transportation system? What are the land use costs of those? So doing things of that nature, improving the vibrancy. Many of these things can create great social spaces, create great community places, create greater vibrancy, create communities of people moving around on buses. I mean, how many times do we hear that we all have a change and if somebody loses their bus driver, quote unquote, and they're disappointed because they had grown a community with them, and then improving the environmental outcomes. So those are the things we're hoping as these projects go that we can drive those outcomes for the community. So, thank you.
Thank you. So what other questions or discussions do you have about this?
Thinking of innovation mindset. Innovation mindset include trying to broad agreement amongst the leadership in the county around. Is that an example of what might be an innovation mindset?
I think all those things. We talked about an energy summit to look at what can we do as a community to drive hydrogen or electricity or something that brings business and economic aspects together, and then we can. Yeah. So anyway, yes, those are all things. I don't know. Think back to the top one, the capacity of WTA to lead those discussions. But those are the things we need to think about, and what are the barriers and how do we do that?
We get it. That's all right. But your partner related.
So want to just take us back to those reasons that we all came up with, why we in this room don't ride, which are the same reasons why most people don't ride. Highlight some of them. Directly address. That's really why they're on the list, right? Because our projects are help build.
So that's kind of the why. What we're looking at, the problems we're trying to solve, help solve. And we hope that hits. We heard very clearly the board say, think transformationally, think differently. And it's what's the improv? Yes, and so it's not cut service or anything to get in the housing game. That's not it at all. It's yes, and what are those things that we can do to help the communities? And to the point Seth was making is, I think one of the strengths when we do that strengths, weakness, opportunities, threats analysis of WTA, one of the strengths is that it is a countywide organization. It can provide a forum for you all across jurisdictions to talk. And so if there are things that we can do in that vein, that's a lever, that's a strength that can be leveraged for the betterment of the entire community. And it's that just a whole of society approach to solve these problems. So next steps from here as we continue feasibility, as we move through today, we'll talk about a couple of these things to put a little meat on the bones. So Michael is going to continue that, Harpool is going to continue that equity discussion to talk about that and how we measure that. Tim's putting a little more meat on the bones on the rapid transit aspect of things. The idea is to bring a little more fidelity to what do these concepts mean and how does it implement these things. So we'll continue with those feasibility studies. I'm thinking about end of second quarter next year that we will have a lot of or all these done. And we can start looking, and we're working on a financial plan and those kinds of things as we're trying to get more fidelity on how many, how much does it cost to do these? What's the tail on these things, the continuing costs and so forth. And then try to work on a financing plan where we can kind of develop the knobs that we could turn on how quickly, which priorities, what brings the best value, and how do we do this over a period of probably 15 years or so.
Right, since I'm oh, Jen, please.
I'm just kind of listening to this discussion and some of the things that have been said. Is the looking at how transit in urban, downtown Bellingham, maybe Ferndale, Linden, that works and how it may be different for out in the more rural areas, the county, and maybe it's not the same system. Like you said, maybe it's not 40 passenger buses with 3 people on it, but maybe it's a smaller bus with a more frequent. Is that part of this discussion as well? Is that we can do more urban transit in those urban developments, but look at what transit means for rural areas as well.
Yes. Simple answer. And that's kind of part of this not losing the service part of it, and defining one of the things on that innovation mindset that we're working on is defining the problem and then the solution, as opposed to hopping to a solution.
Yes.
That may or may not solve what the defined problem is. And so that is the defined problem. How do we solve it?
I'm a transit person, and I just need to point out that we're pulling this station right on time. Okay.
What's over? It's 5 minutes. So what we were planning on doing now with board permission is take a 5-minute break. Yeah, 1 minute early. So take a 5-minute break till about 9:50, and we'll come back, and then Michael Harpool will continue that discussion on the service standards and the metrics component to talk about the equities. So there is coffee and
food coordinating. We could go back. The Bellingham School District.
Any sort of questions or any comments that you might have, or things you picked up last time that might be helpful for the rest of the group? Yeah, so here on the right hand side is a graphic from WTA 2040, and that our first long range transit plan called for a transition to how we evaluate our service. Predominantly in the past, we utilized performance and efficiency metrics. And while those things are still going to be vastly important, we kind of want to emphasize on equity in the future and making sure that we're providing reliable services to the people that need it the most. So WTA planning staff is going to utilize the evaluation standards to assess each route individually, but then the entire system as a whole when it makes sense. And these evaluations will be conducted annually. So I'm sure you remember about in the spring every year, you receive the annual performance report. So our hopes are to utilize this platform to kind of digitize and make that report more digestible for both the board, yourselves, and then the public as well, and having it in an online format so we can go through. So starting off, the evaluation standards have been broken down into 3 different groups. We have our service standards, performance standards, and design standards. And all of these sort of answer different questions that we have about our services. So service standards, answering questions such as our WTA services, connecting the community members, especially priority populations, to the places they need to be and at the time they need to be there. Performance standards are answering questions such as how efficiently are WTA transit services operating, how often are those services being utilized, and how reliable are the transit services. And then design is focused on whether or not the WTA system and associated infrastructure are accessible to all and designed in a way that prioritizes equity and efficiency. So that has a lot to do with our bus stop design, but then also route management and stuff like that. So these standards will be utilized to help us identify gaps in the system, transit service constraints, route and system level challenges, and potential improvement. It's really important to know here in the beginning that these standards aren't going to be utilized to, say, pass or fail our different routes or our system, but they're used to identify those challenges. And then from there, we can dig in deeper to some of the more detailed data and personal observation to try to identify those challenges and decide whether or not a service change is actually needed. So whether that's, realignment of a route, changing the schedule, elimination of a route, or the need for a new route. And for this evaluation, we also separated the different types of services that we provide. So WTA 2040 broke our routes, fixed routes, into 4 different typologies, being frequent, local, urban, small city, rural, and regional. So all of these different types of routes operate under different conditions with different types of schedules. And you might notice that for frequent, we only have the green and gold line highlighted in this map. And that's because the plum and blue lines are consisting of multiple different routes that operate differently than the Route 232 and 331 that are highlighted here as frequent. So starting off with our service standards, I'm going to go through each of the different segments they're going to be utilized. So our first 2 are going to be frequency and service span, where frequency is the rate at which the route is operating. So this has a tremendous impact on reducing layover time, improving the round trip experience for our users, and increasing the overall usability. So this is going to benefit both transit dependent and choice riders. So making a route more utilitarian for someone who is trying to get somewhere is going to benefit choice riders as well. So for each of the different typologies, we have our different targets, and those are going to be, the frequencies that we shoot for those different routes, and then breaking it down by peak and midday, and then also the evening and weekend. So obviously we're not going to be able to run the same frequencies throughout the entirety of the day or on the weekends. And the second is service span. So service span is important to consider. As Dan mentioned, he might be able to get somewhere, but getting home is the issue. And when we're setting these service spans in different areas, it's important to consider the hours of operations of the businesses in that area, the types of jobs in that area, so off-peak travel time and the service industry and things like that. And making sure the service span is tailored to each part of our community can really have a positive equity impact. So priority populations, this is a term and something that we really emphasized through WTA 2040 in our long range planning efforts. So to begin to assess the level at which WTA is serving our population, priority population groups, we began by mapping the distribution throughout the county and calculating service area proportions. This allows us to set priority population targets for each of our different groups that we're looking at. And these are based off the service area. So our service area being essentially the county. And on the map on the right-hand side, you'll see the distribution of minority populations throughout our service area, where the darker highlighted areas are going to be higher concentrations.
Yeah, so the targets for each each priority population group is 22% for each route for minorities, 16%, and move over to 16% for the low income population, and 6% for zero vehicle households. The next step was to look at the market area for each of our routes. So this is Route 232, and the market area is a quarter-mile walk distance to all the bus stops included in the route that's being evaluated. So the market area is again compared to those targets, and you can see on the right-hand side the charts. So Route 232 has a higher proportion of both minority, low income, and zero vehicle households as the service area as a whole. So this would receive an index score of 3, where you receive 1 point for each of the 3 priority population targets. So after evaluating each of the routes through 2022 data, 10 routes received an index score of 3, 15 routes received an index score of 2, and then 3 routes received an index score of 1 or 0. So those 3 routes were below our set target of 2 out of 3. And then the chart to the right kind of shows us what this means, at the greater level. It's showing the proportion of people and households within our service area that are within a quarter mile of a bus stop. And that quarter mile of a bus stop is shown here on the right as the WTA system market area. So if we look at the total population, we're serving about 47% of the people within the county. And when we break that down by priority populations, we're serving around 49% of the minority population, 58% of the low income population, and 64% of the zero vehicle household. And obviously this, has a lot to do with how those populations are distributed throughout our service area, throughout the county. With a lot of zero vehicle households being located in the, downtown Bellingham and the more dense urban areas where a lot of our services go, that makes a lot of sense why we're serving those populations the best. Just as a visual here, we also evaluated the system as a whole. So this is the area when I talk about the system-wide market area, quarter mile to every single bus stop within WTA services. And as you can tell on the right, doing a fairly good job in serving our priority populations. So the next service standard was the access to opportunity. So this is incredibly important to consider as we want to make sure that we're getting, our community members to the jobs they have and the different opportunities throughout Whatcom County, including schools, libraries, medical facilities, senior centers, shopping centers, social services, childcare facilities. So these are all the things where, we were talking about earlier, what might limit your ability to ride transit, or, we have to be able to get where we're going. So we assessed all of these opportunities within WTA service area and created an index to evaluate each route, but then the service WTA system as a whole. So just as a kind of visual here with everything mapped out, we have the 533 serving down to U Street. And so just went through and looked at the different services. So 533 provides access to childcare facilities, grocery stores, medical facilities, and shopping centers. but there are certain opportunities that it does not provide service to. And the employment density, despite serving the downtown, does not meet the standard of 3,000 jobs per square mile. And then on the other hand, when we look at Route 331, we have all different sorts of employment opportunities and social services, medical services within that area. So this route does a really good job on connecting people to the places that they need to be. And when we look at the system as a whole, again, on the right-hand side, we're comparing the service area to that system market area, which is a quarter mile around all bus stops. So within WTA service area, we are providing service to about 62% of the jobs, which I think is quite impressive. 84% of the child care facilities, all colleges and universities, and so on, so forth. All of the identified medical facilities are located within a quarter mile of WTA bus stops. And yeah, when at the route by route level, there are 23 routes that received an index score of 6 or higher, and only 5 routes received an index score of lower than 6. So this is kind of where things.
Can you tell us what the 5 routes were?
Yep, they're listed right here. We have the route 24, 29, 48, ADX, and 533. So 533 is the one that we saw. 24 and 29 are out in the Cordata area. And then 48 is the route between here and Cordata, the regional route.
So these jobs are located at facilities which are probably naturally attracted to arterials, and arterials are really easy for us to put buses on. People don't live anywhere near here, right? So you need the origin as well as the destination. It's kind of a funny metric. It's a metric which indicates destinations but not origins.
Right.
We're really good on hitting we're pretty good on hitting destinations, but that's only half the trip.
Right. Right, but I would argue that these destinations are also located within the prime residential areas within our community as well. There is a lot of correlation between these areas and higher density residences, but there is the goal of connecting the two through. So there's some limitations within the software available for kind of modeling the connection between residencies and opportunities, right? So the ultimate goal was to be able to see how many people can make it to these areas within, say, a 45-minute transit ride, right? Including walk as well. But in smaller areas like Bellingham and the rural outskirts, these software programs currently include walking distance. So if you do a 45-minute walk distance for anywhere within, Whatcom County, you can cover a significant range. So this is, filling in for I'm looking to sort of work with others to develop this ability to limit or improve those software so we can do that within smaller areas like Bellingham.
Are there data sources on the pay level or the type of employment? In other words, if many of our writers are lower income, I really don't care where all the high paying jobs are. Maybe I really care where service or mid-level employment opportunities are. Do you know what I'm saying?
Of course, yeah. So as far as those things go, you can weed it down by service industry. And there are sources that have low income employment centers. So data like that is certainly available. And I went through a lot of that, but they correlate very highly with some of the other destinations, including the shopping centers that are in this model, and just employment density in general. they correlate very closely. So it didn't add or subtract anything to the actual model. And then so performance standards, which we have seen in our annual performance reports for the the past few years or more. We have adjusted these quite a bit actually. We're utilizing very similar standards, but have tweaked the targets that we're going to utilize and the style of evaluation that we're going to be doing. So the first performance standard that we'll be utilizing will be the total weekday boardings. It's an important measure of the effectiveness, the adoption and use of individual route in the WTA system as a whole. So on the right-hand side, you can see the boarding targets by service type and the averages in 2022. I know these are going to be really difficult to read on this page, but the number of routes below the target are on the far right.
What does the percentage mean?
So the percentage is of the system average, and what that means is we took all of the routes, so all the 28 regular running routes, not including shuttles, and averaged the number of boardings in there. So obviously we expect our highly frequent routes like the 232 and the 331 to be much have much higher ridership than
100% would be the system.
Yeah.
So, and on the targets, routes below target, 0 routes out of how many?
So the top is 0 out of 2. And then for local, there's closer to 15, small city rural is 4 or 5, and then regional would just be the 1. So we have the ADI.
So 2 in the top one. Would you say the second category is?
Closer to 15. I don't know
15,
exactly.
8 out of 15, and then
Yeah.
2 out of 5 or 6. Okay.
Yeah, one thing that we'll be finding over time is, as you know, some of the go lines comprised of multiple routes. And unfortunately, the only way we could do it at this level was to break it down by route. What we do know there are segments that have higher ridership where they're associated with go lines. So I think future work will enable us to do those segments. Because we have more than 2 that those the only 2 that so that's the future group.
Yeah, for the blue and the plumb lines, looking at more of the corridor approach for the evaluation there. So breaking down just the stops and segments that are included in that high frequency area and peeling it apart. But it's just, as you can imagine, a lot more data that needs to be separated at a much finer level. To move on, boardings per revenue hour, which I am sure everyone here is familiar with, but again, it's an effective measure for productivity, allowing us to assess efficiency, but also our return on investment. Revenue hours are impacted by both the route distance and the frequency. And what I mean by that is, just the number of hours is going to be impacted by the distance if it's a longer route. But the frequency, even though the 331 is not nearly as long as the ADX, it's running a lot more. So those hours are going to add up. And as last chart, it's structured in the same way, showing the target, the averages from 2022, and then the number of routes sitting below that target.
So I have a question on this. So like this one here, only 5 routes didn't make our target. So it makes us feel pretty good, but we don't have the ridership we want. So maybe our target is too low.
Yeah. I was going to say the same thing. Until we know what the system or average you are measuring it against, like these numbers can be skewed if your service average is set at low or set at higher. The percentages will change.
This doesn't drive us to work harder because, hey, we made our target in so many areas.
Yeah, I think you're raising a good point. This is actually.
Yeah.
Remember it's called
Yeah, yeah.
productivity.
Yeah.
But it was all relative.
Yeah.
It was not.
Yeah. I mean,
if you take a absolute number and you said this is 15 minus. So that is a choice. You know.
well, with this system, the worse we get, probably perform better. I mean, if we have fewer riders, fewer riders, our average keeps going down.
Yeah.
And we'll make more of the targets.
The global issue we are dealing with is that system average.
Just for a couple of points for discussion is one, within local urban, we still have a pretty big difference between the maximum and the minimum running there, you know, so some of the college routes will have much higher ridership, but they, again, you know, similar to the high frequency routes, but they're operating at a different, you know, different level as well. So there's a lot of discrepancies within each typology as well. So, you know, weeding out those key differences is important. But I think you make a really good point, you know, like 5 routes and some are routes such as the 48 and 49, which are essentially, you know, running deadheads from Moab, this area down to the different stations. Another is the cost per boarding. So this one is really important to look at the different typologies because we have a big difference within how much it costs to run a bus for an hour for the different types of routes that we're providing. So as you see, the small city rural, our target there will be $28 per boarding. So it's essentially $28 per ride that we give to a customer. And then at the frequent level, it's still sitting around $10, but our average 2022 was $6.42 per frequent.
One more thing, are we taking into account our total budget of WTA, or you're talking about operating cost of frequent, like one category of frequent? So if there are 10 buses, are you looking at only operating cost of this, or are you looking at the overall cost of WTA? And if that's what our budget is.
Yeah, it's the overall cost of WTA.
Yeah, the route cost only, not the overall.
And then we take that number and we divide it by the total number of hours that we're providing. That to the route by route level.
It could be that if we can take a factor of overhead, it can be spread over the system. That would be the real number.
Is that what this is? Does this have like, you know, all wage costs, overhead, benefits, the whole system is?
No, it's only for that route. For that bus.
This is, I believe this is based on fully allocated costs. This is actually administrative office.
And then, so as we've seen in the past, there's a big difference between our boardings per revenue hour and our passenger miles per revenue hour. So this is the chart that Tim was just referring to, where we have routes that perform really well as far as boardings and others that kind of sit back there, but they also have a lot of passenger miles. So this is considering, you know, the longer routes like the ADX 71 and the rural routes that are super, super important. And while they might not have the boardings that the routes in Bellingham have, they're still providing an essential service, and they're carrying people a very long distance. So as you can see, the regional and small city rural routes are expected to provide more passenger miles per revenue hour than frequent and local urban.
It's like this, it's the old Garrison Keeler, like Wobegon effect. Everything's above average. At least above the averages we're shooting for in 2022, like, yeah, except for one category. So that means that one category is below the average. And so
Yeah, so that, I mean, I think the thing there is that category has bigger discrepancy between the lowest performing and the highest performing, which makes it a bit more different. And yeah, I guess another thing to consider is these are looked at very closely. These numbers are allowing us to investigate things a little bit deeper. So it's like, you know, a starting point to see where everything's at, and the numbers are based relatively off of the performance of the entire system. And then we have cost per passenger mile. So just another way to look at our return on investment at different service types. And then one last performance standard is the on-time performance. So on-time performance is a core element of transit reliability. Buses arriving too early or too late directly impact our passengers, and it can decrease ridership. Off-schedule buses can have a serious impact on riders' lives, including not getting to work, late fees for missing doctor appointments, and not being able to make it to childcare to pick up your child on time, and that has a really large equity. So for the 4 different service types, we have set our on-time performance targets. These are similar to the targets that we've had in the past. And small city rural, a lot of times we are performing a bit off schedule because of the length of the route, but also some of the flex trips as well can impact the on-time performance within those. And that's not considered within these evaluation standards. Yeah, so lastly, make it on to design standards. Not going to spend too much time on this, as the conversation is more around the equity and the performance standards, because while we utilize these design standards for realignments and any new routes, really all that it does before we make any larger changes like that is making sure that all of our bus stops are, as we shoot to improve all of our bus stops to ADA levels, making sure that they're all to our standards, including, the ADA accessible boarding pads, so people with mobility devices can get on and off the bus safely. But when we do move forward and, consider realignments, consider new routes, there are features about route design, considering important factors such as directness, the population and land uses surrounding the area, the road design and capacity, and congestion as well. Route spacing. So when possible, we want to limit duplication of routes. So that's just running, parallel routes within a close proximity to one another. Trying to avoid that to, to a quarter mile or a half mile. That way routes aren't stealing survey from one another, especially if they're going to the same final destination. Then stop design, as I spoke to earlier, making sure that everything's to ADA standards, and WTA's bus stop design guidelines, which was recently published. And then stop spacing. So as we talk about bus rapid transit, we want to talk about optimal stop spacing to help increase efficiency and the attractiveness of a route, but also just making sure that these stops are located near the highest densities of jobs and housing.
Hold on a second. I was writing and I might have not heard exactly what you're saying. So route that's direct is a good thing. For the rider, I want routes which pretty much go where, you know, I don't have to, it's not some circuitous route. I get on a route, it takes me all over this way, but then it finally takes me back where I really want to go. On the other hand, if I'm trying to design a really meaty route, I'm going to start cherry picking all the dense things and try to string them together. I might create a indirect route, which nonetheless perform really highly on hitting the job centers and the population centers. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, so I mean, you could take 331 as a perfect example of what
Gotcha.
I just explained, where, you know, you're going to many of the, you know, urban villages, these very dense and populated with employment opportunities. It's just, there are, so if you're in the downtown area, you would probably choose a different route to get to Cordata Station. So the attractiveness of it decreases if you have to go off, you know, off track or a different way. So there are benefits of going through all of those dense areas, but in a way, is there a possibility to utilize transfers and utilize, you know, a couple routes to satisfy that single route?
I would say it's a balancing act as well. I think it depends on how many riders you might be able to capture in those off-route areas, right? So, and many agencies have ways to measure that. So if you're picking up a certain percentage of riders in the overall trip, maybe that's a good thing. But the overall route riders, you know that once we start deviating off, it'll be good example, I think, route structure is Route 4. Like, so we have a couple of deviations off that route. So.
Just to add to that, it's a where possible sort of situation as well. You know, so if we don't have the resources to provide, you know, direct service from, you know, the core population areas to the downtown in our, hub and spoke sort of transit design, then, you know, those more cutest routes are going to be the best opportunity.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking earlier, let's erase every single route we have and come to the city without knowing anything about where the routes are. For that matter, let's erase all where the streets run. Let's pretend we don't know where the streets are laid out and just look at where people are riding to and see if I can model the best possible routes, right? That are grab the most origins and destinations and maybe get there really directly and say, this is the optimal way to serve it if I didn't have to worry about how a bus actually gets there. Okay, now let me figure out how a bus actually gets there. How close can I get to that optimal model where I've connected everything up? Oh, geez, I've got I-5 in the way. I can't do my optimal model, right? But it seems to me, I don't know, I'm just trying to figure out how you figure out the best routes. Maybe you can do that by pretending you don't know something first and then figuring out the best performance and then try to figure out how to get there as best you can now that you actually put the streets back in.
Helicopters.
Yeah.
Well, I know, I was also thinking earlier, if I was connecting up an electronic system where everything goes at the speed of light and there's frictionless transfers, all I have to do is connect two wires, right? What kind of transportation system do I get? Now, what do I get if I suddenly have high resistance and huge friction to transferring over. That's what we've got. We've got a system, just like an electrical system with the world's slowest wires and the greatest possible friction for transfers. That's what you get. What a terrible system. It should be electronic, it should be infinite and frictionless.
Yeah, there's a project or an experiment that Philip used to demonstrate transit systems. You know, it works best with rail, but you know, forgetting the name of the fungi, but you place these food sources where you have in a modeled area of your city where you have the highest densities and the employment centers, and then you introduce this fungi to it, and it finds the path of least resistance and the shortest path there. And I know out in other countries, they've utilized this to do exactly what you said and find the best way to connect those areas. And then you work from there. You introduce the different barriers that we have. A lot of them are topographical or, the highway system. But then we also have areas that can operate across state. So there's, we're operating on most of our, primary arterials within the city and then upwards towards the outskirts, but it's, yeah, so from there, it's, where do we go? Where do we go next?
The city spent a whole lot of money and time putting, and I took it today, the underpass, the Orchard Street connector, which gets underneath the highway, because it was, I-5 was a barrier, and we were going to fix that, and it was going to be this huge valuable addition to our transportation system. It's not very busy yet. Maybe, and WTA doesn't appear to be hankering to use it. When you guys are planning your routes, which street of ours do you hate the most, right? Which street of ours what absence are you most upset that we don't have, right? I mean, you're trying to run and everyone's trying to get their car or their bus across this city. What did we screw up through history? And what can we consider about fixing through history? So rather than trying to model with this awful, imperfect transportation system, why don't we actually change the transportation system? Something like the Orchard Street connector, some significant thing that we're missing that we're busy having to plan around.
Something we noticed is the lack. Good example. Oh, limited on. The neighborhoods better. Part of the reason is the wetlands and environmental issues, right? We want to push the street through a wetland. Good at that. So that does limit our choice. So we're limited to where we go. So what we do is we look at what but if you look at the slide, but to prove it would be spent a lot of time. Cedar State. Love to have a bridge across the interstate. I'm just speaking in theory.
Find Maple Street on both sides of the highway. And then you realize that was cut in 1960 or whatever. Seriously, it's on the map. You can see where Maple Street used to run. We need to go onto the highway.
If I may, or keep the meeting, if we could transition to the regular meeting at this point.
Okay, is there any further discussion on this excellent presentation?
I want to say thank you. This will allow us, there's going to be evolutions to this over time, but it sets the foundation for us to start embracing the red around what's going on and move forward. So thank you to Michael and Tim for thinking creatively and innovatively and embracing that innovation mindset.
Yeah. Well, thank you all very much for taking the time to listen to this today. And there's some really great feedback on on those standards. And I want to use this as an opportunity to allow you to provide feedback in both the verbal but also written. So this has been shared with everyone, and if you want to go through and take a look at it, look at the standards more closely, please feel free to reach out to me or Tim and provide any comments, suggestions that you might have, because this won't be used in a formal format. The evaluation for 2023.
Today, I want to talk about cost per passenger mile more, but not today. Okay, so that concludes the strategic thinking workshop. We'll now go on to what's the usual business of the board of directors meeting. I believe I got a note that said there were no citizen communications that were received, either written or on this topic. Is there any member of the public here who would like to address the board? Seeing none, we'll now move on to a public hearing with regard to the transit development plan. Have an overview of that plan, then a public hearing, a possibility for public input on that. We'll close the public hearing, come back to the board, and a potential vote on the transportation development plan, which we should all have a copy of. Les, how do we begin this?
We'll just go right over to Tim. Thank you, Chair. This is our annual report, the Transit Development Plan. It's what it stands for. It's a document that's required by state statute by every transit agency in Washington State. The purpose is for us to report to the state legislature on comings and goings in the transit world, the kinds of services and the costs and operating costs and capital costs that gets fed into the state of Washington. They compile a report to the state legislature. So this is our attempt this year to collect that information. Most of the information you've seen before. There's really nothing new from this document. It does cover a 6-year period. It's kind of a report back on 2022, and then it's a look ahead from 23 to 28. So that's 6-year look ahead. So we come to you every year seeking your approval. You have to approve the document. We're happy to answer any questions you might have. Again, it does discuss mostly the numbers in terms of costs. Those tie into the current budgets and our CAP, our operating costs, and then it also talks a little bit about essential service changes. That's very theoretical though, because we still have yet to do much of that service planning and come forward with that information. So, but with that, happy to answer any questions you might have.
I have a question. What happens in 2026 in facilities? After the facilities cost goes way up, does that have to do with the zero emission fleet infrastructure? Is that the next infrastructure bite, or is that big facility cost played in 2026? Is that a Moab remodel, or is that the downtown station remodel? What's the big thing in 2026?
I'm going to turn to Shonda for the specifics on that.
It is zero.
Okay. Thank you.
I've got a couple of questions. Page 5. Since 2020, we've grown about 10% in staff. I guess I worry about that with the routes not changing a whole lot. Maybe it's the Linden Hop that added some of that, but I also know we got a lot of federal money, free money, and I just don't want to grow because we have money to spend.
And I can assure you that is not spend or that there's essentially a couple buckets that we've been resourcing. One is catching up back of the house, if you will, things to operations. So we grew in operations, but we didn't keep up on things like HR and finance and procurement and those things that were becoming pinch points to enable future. So that's part of it. Well, actually, that's most of it. Right. And then growing as service grows as well. So things like Linden Hop.
Page 7, in the document, we talk about Midway and North Lot, and I just thought on page 7, it would be good to put those in there, because if you're an uninformed reader, you have no clue later when they talk about Midway and North Lot, because even I get confused on which one's what. Then now the real questions. Yeah. So on page 31, in 2024, I guess I'm confused how grant revenue is an expense. Because it's in the expense section.
Operating revenues. We have that total available line, the difference.
Yeah.
If we start. grant
Oh, okay. So that's okay. So it's,
expenses, then we have the net expense.
all right. So that grant is all right. So that makes some sense. So then the question is, let's take revenue vehicles, the 26,700,000 on towards the bottom in 2020. You see that number? And then on the next page, on page 33, I add up all the vehicles and it's only 21 million instead of 26 million. And so why is there a discrepancy between those two? So if I add up the first 5 lines on page 33, it's 21,700,000 and you have 26,700,000. Where's the other 5 million?
4, 11, 21. We've got the paratransit buses.
Okay.
Adding wrong.
Oh, no, the first 2 lines is fixed transit, and I assume that's the revenue vehicles. Yep. Or is it all of them? Okay,
That wasn't broken down by, so it would be,
so those first 5 lines would be the total, okay. And then the facilities is 11,200,000, and I can't find that in there.
that would be, midway business. All the way. And transit.
And I added that up and I came up with 7, almost 8 million versus 11 million. Okay. And then most concerning is 2028, the bottom right corner, 500,000.
So let's go back to. This back page is just the items we submitted to the tip. So it's not the full CIP.
Okay,
That gives it not a lot.
all right.
Yes, in P8. Maureen's conversation about we need to look for transit. This has our ideas for 24 and 28, and really what our cash would look like. Right now, assuming the same sort of funding.
Yeah.
What Les had talked about with that grant is we're looking to hire a financial advisor to help us with the different sources of financing. One might be what would that look like for WTA to do that? Ways to add additional revenue. Really want these assumptions in here are we would receive grants for all of these capital.
I guess it's striking when it's 57 million in the top left corner and 500,000 in the bottom right corner. And that's, so we burned through 57 million in 5 years.
If you look at 24.
Yeah, that's a big hit there. Yeah, I noticed that. Oh, yeah. That didn't escape me. Yeah. Yeah. I guess I worry about sustainability and we have to prioritize. Is my point in bringing this out. Because when it's in black and white, it makes you shudder a little bit.
As we bring forward the budget to it, we'll have 20 million in reserves to do them be the zero line. And so we are thinking on those things. So this is just, it doesn't go through the prioritization.
Yes. Just, yeah, this would burn through all of our reserves then, right? I mean, if you did this plan and didn't change, which we wouldn't do.
Which we wouldn't do.
Chiming on, we're going at this burn rate, we're not getting any grants, then like how long do we hold our breath until we?
What this does is to prioritization, and that's where the finance plan comes through to look at what are the various knobs on the revenue side. And then that drives the expense side, and then that'll drive what do we want to be able to do and accomplish from there. In all honesty, part of this is we had heard undesignated reserves, WTA is flush with cash. Okay, how do we spend that cash to go through? And so what were the ideas on this? And that's what this is the plan over that. Obviously,
I've been a proponent. Let's spend it. We got it. Let's do it.
Yeah, but this is also, this is the plan that we budgeted as we go on things. And as we develop that finance plan, that will be creative revenue, but also a plan on what can we do? What is our capacity with those various revenue knobs and expense knobs and the assumptions going forward.
And the 16.6 million in 2026 for federal grants, those are already secured.
Yeah, those are the bus ones, right, Shonda?
There would be an assumption, yes, that we could have. So there are some assumptions. But those aren't.
Yeah, so on that,
So we're burning through it by 2026.
yeah, so I mean, I think I was trying to read and listen at the same time, and maybe I failed, Todd. The federal capital grants in 2026 is listed 16.6 million. That's the question you were just answering? Okay, and your answer for that was?
We are assuming that there are we have grants through the 2025 which is 5307 formula grant get every year, so I've made some assumptions that would continue. So there's a lot of assumptions built in here that we would have grant funds at 80 or 85% to offset these.
And when you say capital expenditures, are you referring, I'm trying to divide out facilities versus
I'm just gonna be
all the others.
for all of them.
It seems to me what's really throwing off all these numbers is the big facility expenses. And I'm sorry, the Moab remodel itself is kind of smallish. It can fit in there, but the big facility numbers, and are those the ones we're assuming or expecting or hoping will be significantly grant supported?
So Bellingham Station, we do have a secured $5 million. The zero emission fleet infrastructure, I'm assuming that we would have a grant. They're not secure.
Those assumptions, are those in your 16.6? Okay. So to not burn through it, we'd have to make additional assumptions about additional grants, or this is the burn rate.
Yeah, because if you look at.
All this is list of things we want to. They're all in as a team. We just started working through a budget. What we can.
If you look at they're kindly reminding me, if you look at the grants out in the out years, 27, 28, there's zero for federal grants assumed in this plan, which would affect that bottom line number as well.
So we do need to go on to a public hearing portion of it. And is there any further discussion?
I think Dan has.
I just want to make one comment. Looking out into 2029, I see $26 million for a development of the rapid bus line. And really just want to, maybe we need to have a better discussion on what rapid transit means within how we're doing it. But to me, that's a lot of money to just develop one line, which is the 331, 232. And maybe there's a better way to allocate those resources. But again, there might be a better time to talk about that and really get into what the rapid transit means. But Yeah, I just see that number, and again, with the 500,000 that's left, and then seeing 26 million in the next year, that's gonna be stretch.
So, yeah, I guess a couple of things. One, BRT is coming up later in this agenda. Two, there's a small start, I always want to say smart start, small start grant that you wouldn't undertake a BRT unless you got that grant, which funds 85% of that, which knocks that down to about a $2.8 million local fund. And then you start moving through, okay, how do you fund that? And then how does that balance with the outcome that you're trying to go? And then Tim will talk about the operational aspects of BRT to address your concern, Dan, about the reason behind it.
Okay, so let's stick a pin in bus rapid transit. We'll come back to that towards the end of our meeting. Any further questions or discussion on the transit development plan before we go to the public hearing? Seeing none, I will open the public hearing. Did we receive any communications that I don't know about? Is there anyone here in person or online from the public who would like to address the board? I don't see any virtual hands or in-person hands being raised. If there's no objection, I'm going to close the public hearing and bring it back to the board for possible action, further discussion.
Well, I guess when I look at all the expenditures, a lot of it has to do with the bottom one, zero emission fleet transition. We're spending a lot of money for that in over the other 5 priorities that we have on the list. Striking to me that we've heavily weighed that one. But I've said that before.
Any motions or further discussion?
We need a motion. to
I
approve.
think we need to approve the transportation development plan so it can be forwarded on to state officials.
Yes. I move to approve the transportation development plan for 2023-20.
The motion before us, any further discussion? All those in favor of approving the transportation development plan signify by saying aye or raise your hand virtually. Aye. Okay, he was here most of the time. Anybody opposed? We will record that as approved. Next, we're going to take a break for the executive session, approximately 15 minutes. Those people who should not be here, please take a stroll in the sunshine. And then we'll come back after that in approximately 15 minutes with further board actions and further discussion. Consideration of setting a public hearing for modification to the fare rates and rules to accept free on fixed route cards on all regional routes. Ms. Shipman, this is just for setting a public hearing, but what's the subject matter? Can you?
Currently, we have free on WTA fixed. WTA and then we wanted to extend those free to in conjunction with. So this would be a small change to the fare rates and rule in a small. We travel.
I think we talked about this at a previous meeting, and this would be to possibly set a hearing for our September 7th meeting.
So moved.
Okay.
Motion before us to set a hearing to discuss the modifications to fare rates with regard to the ADX. Any discussion? All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes. I think 702 applicants. Next, we move on to consent agenda consisting of routine expenditures and minutes.
Move approval.
Second.
Any discussion of those? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I believe that passes. Also, reports to the board. Now we get on to the bus rapid transit study. Mr. Wilder.
Unfortunately, we have 12 minutes left.
Would you like to just do the general manager's report then, or?
We'll have to, make sure our consultants can come back on the 7th, but I think so.
I think we're gonna need 30 minutes on this.
Because it's a pretty in-depth discussion, and I don't want to short shift it, so. So if we can postpone that to the 7th, that's okay.
Okay, everything seems to be understanding. We still have a general manager report.
Yes. I won't take 12 minutes, though. So one thing wanted to loop back with the board. The last meeting in July, Jen kindly brought up about construction projects. And so I've had conversations now with the County Public Works Department. Well, it's not helping with the Hannigan Road, but it will. I appreciate that you highlighting it, because we're now looped into a sharing of information so that into the future, we will know, we'll work together with them going forward. So I appreciate this suggestion. And so now as they're doing their long range planning, they're aware of there are things we can do to help alleviate that. So I wanted to loop back on that, and because Half Ball's not here, but his team. We talked about the rural and tribal transportation grants and the benefits of that, so that's already good. Actually, we talked about WSTA, the Washington State Transit Association conference, and what we heard from WashDOT and FTA folks down there. Big emphasis on using transit to help solve community problems, and the intersection of transportation and many of these problems that we're seeing as a society. And so help. Then the other thing is Senator Murray's staff will be here tomorrow morning. Take a look at some of the things that are going on here, trying to keep that steady drumbeat of on the federal level of help, as we talked about with the TDP and those things, trying to keep that steady drumbeat of this is a good place to invest, and there's a good return on investment for those federal dollars. And then last thing, next board meeting is the 7th of September. It'll be back to the regular format. So any questions? That's all I had. Other than, again, to stress, thank you to you for coming in person to this venue. We'll be curious if this works, what you thought of it as a venue. Thank you to Vicky and Josh for doing all the wizardry that you did on making that happen. Appreciate it. And Vicky's been up since 30, getting everything prepared. So appreciate it. And Maureen, thank you to you for leading us through session.
I agree. Thank you very much. Any further questions for the general manager or any other business for the good of the order? Dan.
I had one thing. So we, a few weeks ago, I got an email regarding having, we always have like, Mariners and all that. And then somebody was wondering if we could put something about the storm. And I'm wondering if you had looked into that at all, if we had checked if that's a possibility of doing that for them. You saw that.
I hadn't seen that email, but
no, man, look that good then.
it could have gone to me. I'm not sure.
I don't know, it was a call for equitable representation. Maybe I'll send it off to the board.
Who sent it?
It says it with the alley.
But we've done support to the Kraken and I think the Mariners in the past.
Right, so, yeah, anyway,
So we'll take
it on to you to take a look, but yeah, they just wanted to know if we could publicly also support the Seattle storm, so.
We're in fair free days now. We can
Right.
make it.
Well, anyway, I saw it come through and
Thank you for.
I wasn't sure if anybody else had seen it. Apparently I'm the only one, so I will forward it off to you and maybe.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan. Thanks for highlighting that.
Yep.
Okay, that's a nice bit. Yes.
I'm just wondering, with
Jen.
fair days, have we seen an uptick in ridership at all with the free fair?
Don't we have the data yet on that?
Oh, okay.
It's just loaded manually, so.
Okay,
we'll have to
gotcha.
check and see if we have that, but we haven't looked.
Yeah, thank you. I should highlight that because it still goes through the 19th, right? It's that,
So we'll
which is
check,
Saturday. Yeah.
check on the data.
Yeah, thank you. We'll report.
But in
back.
previous years, have we ever noticed, because Fair for Rides Free, we noticed a system bump outside of
I
fair?
don't think we've seen much of a bump, honestly. Bump a little bit going to the fair.
Right.
We did, I think in years past, we had an additional trip and we decided not to run that additional trip. We weren't getting much ridership, but we have extended the last trip run the fair in the evening. So whether I will see a bump, we'll see. I kind of my doubts, but
The fair itself is not running like transportation buses, so I'm just wondering if that would,
There is one.
there's one,
It goes.
it must be a tiny one.
It's a smaller
not
bus.
the articulated
It's a
buses
smaller one
anymore.
that's running from the fair site to Fisher School. They're
Oh,
using
really?
Fisher School parking lot
Oh.
as offsite parking.
Oh. People know about it?
I do. Am I a person?
Yes, you are the person. You're also the mayor, so. It was interesting because I had one, I was delivering meals to a lady and she says, oh, I just missed the people parking in the church parking lot across the street. I watch them all the time during fair week and they must not be running buses.
And my theory on that is because they're on Sunday, all the churches wanted their parking lot.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Eric?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, on the fair, as Tim mentioned, the only thing that we've really changed operationally
Yeah.
is last route that was out of service at 8:45 and is now returning into Bellingham.
Yeah.
We just talked about this in the operations team meeting yesterday, and we think there's an opportunity next year to really look at how we're partnering with the fair and marketing. We didn't necessarily do a great job of communicating what we're doing with service and such this
Yeah.
year, and you know, to be more in partnership with the fair, with the city of Linden, to see if we can increase the amount of transit use. From the fair that we're seeing.
Was wondering, we've had discussions about zero. And, how much really, during this 10-day experiment, basically of free fares in the county is, the price of getting on a bus really a barrier to people accessing service. So it might, kind of just a little snapshot of what's that.
Anything else for the go to the order? Okay, thank you everyone for coming. This meeting is adjourned.